We start by framing the Institutional Review Board, or IRB. Don't get me wrong, the IRB is necessary, but we must understand it as the floor, not the ceiling. It represents the minimum legal requirement to avoid liability. Its primary historical function is to protect the university from lawsuits and bad PR. That is a limitation. Legal ethics focus on institutional protection. Our goal in transdisciplinary research is much higher. We focus on the well-being and dignity of the participant. Just because something is legal doesn't mean it's ethical. You can follow every rule and still harm a community. We aim for an ethical standard that honors the humanity of those we work with. A key shift in this practice is moving to dynamic consent. The old model treats informed consent as a transaction. You hand someone a confusing 10-page document, they sign it once, and you never talk about it again. That is not ethical. The new model views consent as an ongoing relational process. It is a conversation, not a contract. In transdisciplinary research, our questions evolve. The project changes. Therefore, we must practice application, reconfirming consent as the research evolves. If the risk profile changes, you have to ask again. You have to ensure they are still on board with where the bus is going. To do this, we utilize specific frameworks. Community-based participatory research, or CBPR, emphasizes shared decision-making. It's not ethical to make all the decisions in the university and just use the community for labor. We also adhere to indigenous protocols. This means respecting tribal sovereignty and specific local rules for knowledge gathering. If a community says a story is sacred and cannot be published, you don't publish it. Period. Ultimately, we practice relational accountability. We acknowledge that we are answerable not just to the university and our funders, but to the community itself. If they aren't happy with our work, we have failed ethically. We also have to rethink risk. We must assess risk through a complexity lens. In complex systems, our interventions can have unforeseen ripple effects. You might intervene to help one group and accidentally disadvantage another. We must evaluate systemic risk. Traditional ethics looks at harm to the individual. Will this survey upset you? But we need to ask about harm to the community or ecosystem. Will publishing this data stigmatize the entire neighborhood? Will this policy recommendation disrupt local traditions? The principle of do no harm must be expanded to include social, cultural, and reputational harm. Relational practice demands reciprocity. We must move from a transactional model of taking data to a reciprocal model of giving back. This involves benefit sharing. We need to ensure the community benefits directly from the research outcomes, not in 10 years when a book comes out, but now. Can we share resources? Can we co-author? Can we prioritize capacity building, leaving the community with new tools, skills, or trained staff? If you leave the community exactly as you found it, or worse, drained of time and energy, your research was parasitic, not symbiotic. We also face new ethical challenges with big data. We have to worry about re-identification risk. With enough data points, even anonymous data can be de-anonymized to find specific individuals. To combat this, we practice data minimization, collecting only what is strictly necessary, not vacuuming up everything just because we can. Crucially, we must consider group privacy. Even if individuals are anonymous, if you publish a report saying neighborhood X has a high rate of Y, you might stigmatize the whole community, lowering property values or increasing policing. We must protect groups as fiercely as we protect individuals. We need to talk about vulnerability and power. We often label populations as vulnerable, but we must reframe this. Vulnerability is often situational, created by oppressive systems rather than inherent to the person. Because researchers almost always hold more structural power, education, money, status than participants, there is always a risk of coercion. If I don't say yes to this survey, will I lose my benefits? We must implement safeguards to ensure that power is not exploited, even unintentionally. We have to constantly check our privilege at the door. Relational ethics isn't just about how you enter, it's about how you leave. We need ethical exit strategies. How does the researcher leave the field? We must avoid abandonment, the sudden withdrawal of relationships and support when the data collection finishes. It creates a sense of betrayal. We must plan for sustainability. What happens after the grant ends? Have we built capacity so the work can continue? Have we said goodbye properly? Leaving well is just as important as starting well. Finally, all of this requires moral imagination. This is the ability to empathetically imagine the impact of our work from the participant's view. It requires reflexive ethics, constantly checking our own moral compass, not just the rule book. And it requires integrity, doing the right thing when no one is watching, when the IRB isn't checking, and when it would be easier to cut corners. Ethics is a muscle. We have to exercise it every day of the research process. To summarize Lesson 5.1, ethics is a relationship, not a checklist. Treat people like partners, not data points. Consent is a dynamic, ongoing process that must be reconfirmed. And finally, research must be reciprocal. It must benefit the community just as much as, if not more than, it benefits the academy. Thank you.